Hey guys, welcome back to Dark Expeditions. I'm Brandon, and today we're going to be talking about the tragedy in Walla Walla's Chinatown. Alright, so today we're going to be talking about the time where 11 Chinese people were burned to death. So on March 2nd, 1920, 11 Chinese people died from an explosion that was said to be caused by fireworks. The story goes, as the Chinese were celebrating the 9th anniversary of the founding of the Chinese Republic, two men could be seen lighting off packages of firecrackers from the balcony. Apparently, one of the men decided to walk back inside as the package was lit, resulting in many firecrackers going off immediately. Then it is said that the smoke was so intense that those people in the second story of the building could not escape. Those who died were 10 Chinese Walla Walla gardeners and one Chinese lady from Pasco, Washington. In the original article from the 1920 paper, the celebration was said to have gone on for several days before the tragedy, and although the fire was said to be of great size, witnesses claimed that there was very little fire damage to the building itself. For some reason, I do not fully trust this story, and I will look further into the Chinese people's experience here in Walla Walla and the surrounding areas. So let's look back into the 1800s. All right, so back in the late 1800s, there was a thing called the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, I believe. And so basically, it said that Chinese were always at a disadvantage because laws prohibited the Chinese from having/raising a family, and the Chinese were not allowed ownership and were denied the right to become citizens. Especially over in Seattle in the early days, you can find evidence of extreme treatment of the Chinese. But Walla Walla, on the other hand, you can find not really much. How come when it comes to Walla Walla and racial crimes, you never find real evidence? I think it's because the elites of the town really try to push it away and hide it. So let's look more into it. When the Chinese were employed to build the Northern Pacific Railroad, apparently there was no resentment towards them, except for in 1895 when a crew of white laborers was replaced with a Chinese crew. Attacks on the Chinese were reported in Walla Walla and Pasco, Washington. I couldn't find the specifics on the Walla Walla attacks, but it was also reported that a mob of masked men had marched the Chinese men across the Pasco Bridge and told them to stay away. The incident was witnessed by a Northern Pacific watchman who actually ordered them to court only for the mob of men to be acquitted by the jury. So basically, nothing happened to them. The jury just let them go. An early Walla Walla resident, Parker Barrett, explained that in his time, a watermelon stolen from a white man's store was thievery. One stolen from a Chinaman's wagon was a good joke. And he said wagon because a lot of the Chinese people, they had truck gardens and stuff, as they would call it back in the day. And, they would use that to haul all their goods here and sell it. In another recorded attack, two masked men assaulted three Chinese people in a Northern Pacific section house in Kennewick, Washington. Two of the Chinese were knocked unconscious, and the third was violently beaten for several minutes. The masked men proceeded to run the Chinese men's pockets, getting away with more than $300 in gold coins. Thankfully, the victims were able to give detailed descriptions, and the attackers turned out to be a baker and a butcher from Pasco, Washington. Although I'm sure it was just a slap on the wrist for the white men, because I couldn't find anything else that says what happened to those masked men that came and beat them, the butcher and the baker. So I'm pretty sure they were just like, hey, like, don't do that. But really, like, no one really cared. And if you go 17 minutes into my very first video on my channel, I go into better detail explaining the Chinese community and how they lived in the Walla Walla underground back in the day. They were a pretty big community. They had a lot of stuff, even though they were denied ownership of all these things. They really strived to have, what they could, and it was taken from them constantly. And you'll see that with a bunch of other races here in town that aren't white. It's just constantly putting them down. But recently I figured out that in 1911, members of the Chinese community built the Pacific Enterprise Building, which housed 90% of the local population of the Chinese people. It was on the corner of 5th and Rose Street, and that's where we're at right now. We are on 5th Avenue, and Rose Street is just right down there. And I will put a picture in the video of the Pacific Enterprise building so you can get a better idea of what it is. So basically, that building was, built in 1911, but it was torn down in 1963. So, um, let's see. Although in 1947, a white person who isn't named purchased the building, which forced the Chinese to find housing in general population and forced a lot of them just to, go find their own stuff. It really sucked. After all the labor and hardships against the Chinese people, the white people continued to push them away. And like I said, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was set to only last 10 years, but it was advanced to another 10 years after that. And then after those 10 years, it was extended another 10 years. So that's a total of 30 years of being discriminated and pushed away and not letting them have what they want and what they work for. Um, the Chinese community put together $16,000 to build the Pacific Enterprise building, and eventually a white person found a way to push them out. The more I research and piece together the real story of Walla Walla, the more I realize that the rich white families, with their generational wealth and family names being presented everywhere, are descendants of horrible people. Some may be clueless and some definitely aren't, but I hope they realize that their ancestors aren't who they portrayed to be, and the truth will be told. Um, it's just really sad, I'll put pictures in the videos, and let's look over here from the picture. I believe it's right here where the market is, and you can decide for yourself. Tell me in the comments if you think different. But I'm pretty sure this is where it was, and that's where 90% of the population was for a long time. And thinking they have some sort of stability just for it to be taken away. It was really horrible. And yeah, the hardworking Chinese people, they built all this stuff for us. They built the railroads. They went and found a bunch of gold in the mines, which white people took the gold from them once they found it, pushed them away again. And after all this hard work, they just told them, all right, like, go back to China. We don't want you here, which I'm sure they already knew. It's also reported that a lot of Chinese men, because it was mostly Chinese men, since they weren't able to raise families and stuff, they were working hard here to send money back to China to their real families and stuff. And yeah, a lot of Chinese men didn't plan on staying here, but it would have been nice if they were accepted. But it's just not the case with many races here in Walla Walla back in the day. And you're going to see traces of that here in present day. It's just crazy. But yeah, I'll get back to you on that. I'll see if I can find some more. Thank you. All right, so right now I've brought you guys back to the Mountain View Cemetery, to the Asian section, and I, I we went here in a previous video, but it was one of the underground videos, but I wanted to come back and kind of talk about it again. And so you see here, this is dedicated to Chinese citizens of Walla Walla who contributed to the founding and development of our community. It really is kind of crazy because I'm sure whoever put this in had really good intentions, but it wasn't the um, it wasn't what was going on when they were here. They were really pushed around and stuff. But this is way after the fact that this is here. Let's go back to the other side. It says the translation is honor and remembrance, cemetery of immigrant elders, as long lasting as the heavens. And it's really nice and sweet for anyone who doesn't know, but for the real history, it's kind of it's bittersweet. A lot of these tombstones I really can't read. I obviously don't know the language. I hope they say some beautiful things there. But yeah, And then looking over behind us right here, this is what they called a Chinese bank. And apparently they would burn possessions here. I don't know if they were used during the burials of the Chinese people and stuff, and maybe they'd burn their possessions so it goes up with them. I'm not completely sure. But right here it says the first Chinese came to the area in the 1860s during the gold rush, and more came later for railroad construction. As laborers, merchants, and farmers, these Chinese pioneers served an important role in the development of early Walla Walla. The brick structure, a Chinese bank, was used during a traditional Chinese service for burning possessions. And yeah, they give them credit now, but basically they just used them for labor in their services, all the stuff that they would do, and then pushed them away, like I said. And yeah, let's get a shot inside. We got a grill going on in there, stop things from falling all the way down. And yeah, so basically from this point back onto the road right here, this is the whole Chinese section. It's not a lot, and I wish there was a sign to explain where the 11 Chinese people were buried, but there's not. And so that's just what I wanted to show you again. And yeah, let's get a look over here at these tombstones. I really wish I could read it, but I can't. It's a beautiful language, honestly. It's really impressive how they can, you know, write those figures and stuff, especially when they write it out on paper and stuff. But yeah, guys, so I think this will conclude the video about the tragedy in Chinatown here in Walla Walla. And I hope to get back to you soon. Hope you learned some more about your own places and cultures and stuff. And yeah, thank you.